All right, everyone, welcome to today's webinar. I am very excited for today. I see a lot of familiar faces. Today, this should be really amazing. Um, the title of today's webinar is Showcasing Your Shop's Technical Expertise. My name is David Tulkin. I am the Director of Business Development here at Shop-Ware. Before we get started, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. In the last 10 years, I've worked at several companies, including Bird Eye, Funbox, Demand Force. And 8 of those 10 years have been really in the automotive aftermarket. I've worked on partnerships with Napa, CarQuest, Bosch, Sunoco, O'Reilly's, Worldpac. Spent a lot of time attending different conventions around the United States. I've spoken at dozens of events. I've visited tons and tons of shops. I really believe spending time in shops, seeing what owners actually do is the most important thing to understanding how to best service them. I am by no means an expert in automotive repair, but I have lots of experience working in technology in the aftermarket and helping shops grow, thrive, create a work-life balance, drive CarQuest, using technology to their advantage. Personally, I live with my partner and our 5 children in Pacifica, California, which is just south of San Francisco, where our Shop-Ware office is. I have a passion for all things grilled and smoked. I spend most of my time in the outdoors, hiking, camping, fishing, hunting, spending time with my kids. And like I said, I have a true passion for helping shops one-on-one and in groups, creating a community of sharing of information. I love helping them succeed. I love working with products like Shop-Ware that really create raving fans. And my goal is really just to help everyone create the business that they want to have. This presentation was originally created and presented by the CEO of Shop-Ware, Carolyn Coquelet. If you have any questions, just some housekeeping items, there is a Q&A panel that you can access at the bottom of your screen. Or you can raise a hand. I will try and answer those questions either during the presentation if it's pertinent, or sort of as we get started, at the end in the Q&A. So without further ado, enough about me. We will get started. All right. So today's session is called Showcasing Your Shop's Technical Expertise. And technical expertise is everything. When you think about why people patronize your shop, they come because you fix their car at an affordable price and you treat them with respect. And a lot of people ask Carolyn, who owns a shop and is a CEO of Shop-Ware, oh, your shop is woman-owned, it's beautiful, it's environmentally conscious, that must be part of your competitive advantage. Just like others might say, oh, you do community work, or you're a staple here and there. And the reality is that if you can't fix the car at an affordable price and treat them with respect, none of those other things really matter. So this talk will touch on all 3 of those things, but actually our primary focus is going to be number 1. And that's because number 1, your technical expertise is the number 1 component of this formula. All 3, of course, are important, but this is the order. Number 1 is the most important, period, because if you can't fix the car, the price and how you treat the customer doesn't matter, right? And if you can fix the car, but the customer can't afford the price, they'll presumably go somewhere else and find someone who can. And finally, if you fix the car at a reasonable price, but you still treat them badly, they'll go find someone who can do all 3 of those. So fixing the car is the number 1 priority. And fixing a car is what you sell, right? That's your product. And I point this out because often, and it seems odd to say this, but you often forget that this is what you are selling, right? It's what you're best at. It's your strength. It's why presumably you got into the business in the first place. And it's also what the customer needs, right? It's what they know least about. The customer doesn't know how to fix their car, right? If they did, they would presumably do it themselves. So fixing the car is everything. My goal in this presentation is going to teach you to improve how you communicate, to show the customer how you fix the car. Now, that might seem trivial, but when I think about all those 3 things, the first one is really the one that I think most shops unknowingly can use the most improvement on. There is all this talk, about how you speak to the customer, marketing, phone skills, but telling the customer how you fix the car, I think, is the area that we really have the most room for improvement. And that's actually good news, because as a shop owner, right, you're under a lot of pressure, right? If you look at trends in vehicles these days, they're extremely complex. They're not getting any less complex. You've got computers sort of coming out of the dashboard. You got your phones connected, your Alexa connected. It couldn't get any more complicated, right? And then on the flip side, you've got the consumer who really has no concept of how the car works, right? And that's by design, right? It says check engine, but it doesn't really mean check engine. Meanwhile, their own experience as a customer or consumer is they want to get whatever they want right away through their phones with no problem, right? They're super enabled. They want everything to be accessible. They want a quick response time. They want personalization. Their expectations for how they're going to be treated are extremely high right now, right? And then, of course, when something goes wrong with the car, which is an unwelcome event, you're left to reconcile, right? As a shop owner, you're the reckoners. You're the ones that basically bring these two parties together. You have to satisfy both of them. And I think if you look and think about through this presentation, there are probably ways to improve how you're doing this reconciliation, because not both of them are getting done to the best of your ability. And technically, right, of course, you are servicing the car, but today's webinar is going to be about how you're showcasing what you're doing to the car to the consumer. And really right now, as a shop owner, you're at, I would say, an adapt or die moment in business, right? And a lot of change needs to happen. And that's because you're under a lot of pressure from all sides, right? You have the things that I was just talking about, like trends, but also you acknowledge there's a challenge to be technically capable these days, maintaining tools, finding technicians, keeping technicians, keeping them trained, keeping them up to date. You have all of those challenges. There's also increased competition for customer trust right now. Not just other shops. You've always had other shops that were trying to compete for your business, but now you've got concierge services on the internet, or you've got the internet to tell them one thing or another, so they can come in and say, oh, this is what's wrong with my car. This is not what's wrong with my car. You have the insurgence of concierge services. So if the experience with the customer is unwelcome, they can just use a different service to accomplish getting their car fixed. And that's actually a significant erosion to your profitability. All the technicians out there, you're under extreme pressure to learn all the different tools, to master the service information. There's scanners, websites, a plethora of things that you need to stay up to date on if you want to be at the top of your game. You've got digital vehicle inspections, other shop processes, the list goes on and on. And as a technician, you're paid based on what you do, not what you know. And that's kind of odd, and unlike other professions where you're paid on what you know and not necessarily what you do. And the reason is because it's no longer obvious what you did to the car. You actually need to become a great communicator, a great record taker. That's true of technicians that are working in the shop. It's also true for the shop themselves. The one thing I want to note before we keep going is that technicians are really the one piece of this equation that are essential as we go forward, right? Auto repair is not going anywhere. And so if you want to stay and compete, there's real money to be made for sure. Self-driving cars obviously are not going to be self-fixing cars. And when we talk about showcasing our technical expertise, what we mean is we're selling our technical expertise. And that is really the theme for what we're going to talk about. It's about selling your technical expertise. And the better that you sell yourselves, the better your shop will be, the better your livelihood will be, and everything else will be as well. So how have we communicated in the past, and how do we need to change, right? So what are we done in the past, and what do we need to do in the future, right? Historically, of course, we have the paper repair order, right? Handwritten, some still are, but most are printed from a shop management system. We've got the phone call, which everyone is familiar with, and then semi-recently, we've added DVIS and texting. And I'm going to talk about all four of these because all four of them have their limitations, and these are probably the four that are being most often used. So, the repair order. Repair orders are inherently challenging because they have to tell the whole story, right? There's a saying that if it's not written down, it didn't happen. And I've heard one of our shops say, If there was nobody left on earth except for the judge, the consumer, and the repair order, would the repair order appropriately defend what you did on the car? The repair order is essential, though, and it has the burden of hindsight. It's also challenged, though, because it has to keep track of all these parallel activities on the car, which we'll talk about. Right, the idea of a car coming in because it won't start, you put in a new starter, the customer drives off, and that's it. That's relatively easy to convey on a repair order, but that never happens, right? That's a simple thing to articulate, but the reality is that that's not what happens, right? What actually happens is that a vehicle comes in for an oil change and the customer has a couple things they want you to look at that requires a diagnosis. And now coming out of both the maintenance and the diagnosis, you're now going to have a handful of repairs. So now you have information that has to relate to all these different activities, and it's very hard for you to put all of this together in a succinct way into the repair order. There is this time-honored service writing concept of concern cause correction, which you're all familiar with. But the problem with CCC is that it's a legacy from when you used to have to handwrite repair orders, right? You would ask the customer what the issue was, you would listen to what they had to say, and you'd write it on the RO. And then whatever you found, you'd add to that piece of paper. And it didn't matter if those two activities of both selling the job and what the customer said were intermixed, because you're going to have to rewrite it anyway. And of course, also cars were a lot less complicated then. But that's not the case anymore, right? And you're not doing yourself a very good service by sort of mixing what the customer states and what you're asking the customer to pay for alongside each other. And that's a key point. There are also limitations with legacy shop management systems, forcing you to put back of the house notes on the ticket. And in both cases, you're essentially burdening your counter staff with making them clean this self up. Okay, limitations of the phone call. So talking on the phone is what is called a synchronous activity, right? You both need to be present talking on the phone. But the problem is that the customer attention span while talking on the phone is extremely limited, right? Chances are they're not isolated in a room waiting for your phone call, but they're doing 10, 15, 20 things just like you are. So from the time that they pick up and you say hi, and you say hi, and then there's small talk, you really have like 10 seconds to get your point across. So if you're talking about a starter and the quality of that starter and what the price is, then it's pretty easy to get that across in 30 seconds. But when you come back to contemporary context where we're talking about maintenance and diagnoses and multiple repairs, it's really difficult to get all of that across to the customer so they can comprehend what you're saying. It also really doesn't give the customer the time and space to gain understanding, right? And I've heard other shops say, you don't want to call a customer at the end of the day and try and sell them work because they're going to say they want to think about it overnight. And I think that's ridiculous, and here's why. You absolutely want your customers' buy-in when they say yes. And maybe there's concern that they're going to go price shopping. But the reality is I'd much rather have that conversation with them now, right, on your terms than some other time, right? Be proactive, not reactive. So that space on the phone, it's just not great for giving them the chance to make their own decision. They're under pressure, and in doing so, they often make decisions based on, do I like this guy? And that's not a great reason for them to make a decision. There's a lot of emphasis really right on management training or on phone skills. And so now suddenly what the car needs and what's best for the car is being determined by the personality of your counter staff. And I want you to think about that for a second, right? Like there's absolutely no relationship between the two, between the personality of your counter staff and what you're delivering in the value to the car. It also has no relationship with the quality of your technician that are at the back of the house. So that's problematic. Or on the phone, the customer starts thinking in terms of budgets, right? So they're thinking, okay, what am I saying? I'm quickly adding it all up, and there's this and there's that. And okay, how much money do I have? And again, that conversation has no relationship to what the car actually needs and what's in the best interest for them overall. So giving them a space to really think about what you're saying independent of a phone call is really important, right? And then, of course, last but not least, the hardest part of all of this is that they actually have to pick up the phone, right? Which most of them don't do anymore because everyone's just sending text message. So the phone in itself is just not a great way for you to convey all of this information. And I'm sure you've called other shops or talked to other shops on the phone. I certainly have. And what do I hear in the background? It's just the phone constantly ringing and ringing and ringing and ringing and ringing. And it's just choking your repair shop. All right, DVIs. When we look forward, we say, okay, now I have DVIs, right? I have some other tools to help get more digital content in the customers, and I'm using videos and all of that. But DVIs aren't perfect either, right? And here's why. DVIs are traditionally performed in parallel to the customer's concern, right? You've got what you put on the repair order as far as what the customer needs, and then you have this independent document that's capturing the inspection, right? They're typically one size fits all, and they're performed at the intake, right? It's something that you do as a standard procedure at the beginning of the car getting dropped off or when the technician first gets their hands on it. As a result, it's only capturing the initial inspection. It's not capturing what you did or what you ultimately sold or repaired on the car. It's not showing the customer how you fix their car. It's showcasing maybe how you'd like to fix their car, but how you actually fix their car isn't contained, and that's really important. Texting. We love texting, and we love texting customers. Why? Because they respond right away, and that's great. But the reason that they respond so quickly is because it's a very simple way for them to communicate, right? If you're talking about selling high dollar repairs, if you're going to sell a high dollar RO with a bunch of different recommendations, it's very hard to get that across in text message. Now, you can certainly summarize it and you can say, hey, you need $3,000 worth of work, but that's not a real high value pitch to the customer on why they should buy your services, right? It's disconnected. And what I mean of that is it's a parallel process. It's you texting and them texting back. It's not a real conversation. And then that conversation is completely independent of what you then have to go back and put on the ticket. So you've got this text message conversation that you're having. You've got to transfer that back to the repair order so you know what the customer said. And that just gets messy. Of course, you can always text someone, hey, call me, but now we're back to the limitations that we had with the phone. So, that doesn't necessarily work either. All right, so taking a brief breather, and get a little sip of water. This is the emphasis of the presentation, of what you're going to do. This is what you need. This is what I need you to take away from this presentation. It's very simple, and I'll go into each of these three things. But basically, this is the magic from where you're going, from where you are today and where we want to go, and being able to better meet your customers' needs where they are, and better promote yourself and your technical expertise. The first is you're going to rethink how you're service writing. So we're going to adapt our traditional way of thinking about concern, cause, and correction, and we're going to bring customer states out of the 20th century. We're also going to clarify your labor operation. So the emphasis here is on clarity, right? We want to be super clear. We're going to get smarter about how we're capturing service details to present to the customer. And we're going to showcase what matters. Showcase what matters, add value, and then provide that reference for perpetuity. Again, length here should not be your primary concern as long as you're clear, right? Clarity is the key. So as long as what you're talking about is pertinent to what the customer needs, you should include it. And that's sort of the balance between technical expertise, i.e. what you're selling, and overwhelming them, intimidating, and making them not want to listen anymore. And last but not least, you're going to emphasize digital content. And I know some of you are already thinking, I already do this, I have DVI, I'm texting, I'm doing things digitally. This is the key component and the key takeaway. This needs to be done before, during, and after the repair, right? It needs to surround the activities that occur on the vehicle. If you've got a favorite DVI tool or a cable shop management system that can do this, that's great. If not, you need to find one. And until then, you need to solve this problem for yourself with online storage like a Google Drive or a shop camera or something, and we'll get into all of that later. So you don't have to do a wholesale change of your business, but you do have to figure out how to get this information in front of the customer, right? And that's what we're going to talk about, is not just how to capture the information. Most of you can figure all that out, but how you can share this information with the customer, right? So we're talking about digital media and the conversation being digital as well. Doing these things will help your shop look more sophisticated, knowledgeable, and organized, right? And we all want to look like that. It will reinforce your competency and your care to the customer. And all of these things are going to deeply enhance the value that you're presenting, right? And that's really what we're talking about here is value, is taking that value, taking that technical expertise and putting it in front of the customer so they understand. And this is my favorite, it's going to shift the emphasis off of you, right? The shop is kind of like the messenger, and it will, when the car comes in and there's something wrong with the car, the burden and everything is put on you. And by showcasing your technical expertise and putting it in front of the customer in the correct way, you're going to move the attention from you onto the car. And the car is the problem, right? You're not the problem. All right. So, rethinking CCC. First thing you're going to do, stop putting customer states as part of the service that you're charging for. Number 2, you're going to stop using codes or jargon in how you describe your services. And 3, you're going to stop putting back of the house notes on the repair order. So let's take a look at this RO on the top, right? This top RO is an example of one that is doing 2 of these things. Here is a service that is presumably called MWL as presented to the customer. We, of course, know what MWL stands for, but the customer doesn't. And then inside of the service, we now have added some customer states notes. So, right, very traditional. Customer states, master MWL on, pulled codes, found P0171, texted oxygen sensor, found bad, replace oxygen sensor, clear codes. And this thing is costing the customer $850. So $850 for MWL. Think about that. I'll come back to this one in a second. The bottom one is an example that says distracting of back of the house notes leaking onto the repair order, right? So if we look, we've got service request, drop off, exclamation point, right? And then just a bunch of translated customer states, check and advise, check breaks, customer drop off again, exclamation. And this, of course, is the service advisor using the notes that are being presented to the customer to help keep track of their own internal operations around, is it a drop off? Is it a loaner? Is it what? That's not the customer's problem, right? That's not the customer's concern, right? It's super distracting to the customer, right? You're not charging them for that. You're not charging them for a drop off, right? So why do we even have any of that information on there in the first place? So rethinking customer states. What you're going to do instead is you're going to stop putting customer states in one separate, you're going to start putting customer states in one separate place in plain English. Now, I know that might sound crazy because you've been doing it differently for a long time, but when you think about it, what you do when you do this is you're actually presenting untampered, factual information. What did the customer actually state? You're not interpreting it all, you're just writing what the customer stated in that one box. Now, this allows you to skip having to figure out where which concern goes and in which bucket, right? You don't have to therefore think about what the technician ultimately found and where that goes under the customer concern to put it somewhere. None of that has to happen anymore. There's also no redundancy. So if for whatever reason, right, the customer has multiple concerns and they all have the same cause, you're not having to repeat that you replace an oxygen sensor 3 times, for example. And that's important because as you're then presenting this to the customer in terms of what you're charging them for, they can think, well, did I pay for this 3 times? And of course they didn't, but they don't know that. So in all of these cases, this makes sense to the customer. The customer understands this. Simply stating what they said in plain English where they can see it, it's much more intuitive. All right, in addition to doing that, we're going to start presenting the services that you sell individually and for each type of service that you're selling. So again, what you're going to do is start presenting the services that you do sell individually and for each type of service that you're selling. And I'll show you examples. So you've got maintenance services, you've got diagnostics or testing, and you've got repairs. And each one of those things needs to have its own service, and what is included in that needs to be called out. Itemizing what these services include is important too. So in all cases, you need to itemize things when you're diagnosing. You should itemize things during maintenance. Just don't throw, for example, like an LOF up there and doesn't have any detail about what it includes. Same thing with your repairs, and I'll give you another example. about how you can present this and how it works. But presumably, if it takes time and you're therefore charging the customer for it, then they should appreciate that this took time and they can see that this thing happened. Basically, it's what is the customer paying you to do? They're requesting you to do something, and that's what you should be calling out, right? So if you think about it, what is the technician spending time doing? So anything that a technician is doing, that's something you want to call out. Now, you don't have to go super deep, but I like to think of it, especially when you consider the tasks that could be assigned to different technicians, right? So for example, if one person did the alignment and the other person did the 0-point calibration, you can call those things out separately. And it also, presumably, you might need to record different technicians and allocate, right, their build hours differently as well. So this is a redux of the previous service that I showed with the oxygen sensor, right? So instead of saying MWL, the first service is called Master Warning Light On First Hour of Testing. And, it varies depending on your shop management system, but the reason why you put, of course, MWL or LOF, of course, in the title of your service is because you have to memorize those codes so you're able to extract them and add them to the ticket. And again, if that's how your shop management system is working, that's not your customer's problem, right? Don't let whatever limitations in your own internal processes end up leaking into what you're presenting to the customer, which ultimately lowers your value. What you want to show to the customer is an unabbreviated version of what it is they're being charged for. In this case, it can still be warning light on, and what they're paying for is the first hour of testing. And then inside of this service, right, we see all the things that are going to be included as part of this first hour of testing. And then we have a second service, right? So the first service is the diagnosis, and the second service is repair. And in this case, the service, replace oxygen sensor. And it's showing itemized subtotals for label, parts, hazmat fees, right? And it's a high dollar repair. It's $850. So why is it so high? Well, we've got a high quality part, and we also want to call out the different aspects of the service that took that amount of time. So if you look at labor in this case, this is probably, 3 hours of labor or so, depending on what your labor rate is for the shop. What did you spend 3 hours doing, right? Not just R&Ring the oxygen sensor. So let's put these two different examples side by side and think about it and how the customer was going to interpret. Essentially, these are the exact same services. It's just how you're writing them up. So on the left-hand side, I'm paying for the fact that I reported that a warning light was on. So in a way, basically, I'm getting punished because I have a warning light on, and that warning light cost me $850. But of course, it wasn't the warning light that cost the customer $850, right? It was the fact that they had a faulty oxygen sensor. So what I paid for on the left-hand side is questionable. But over here on the right-hand side, it's obvious what the customer's paying for, right? They're paying for, as I mentioned, the diagnosis and then the repair. And then by nature of putting the diagnosis on there, it's going to help your advisor remember, oh, hey, I should be charging for this time, right? And in this case, we get an extra $150. So it's the exact same service that you did. It's just all about how you're presenting that to the customer in a way that demonstrates value back to your shop. So going to get into rethinking CCC real quickly, but before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about DVIs. It's not that I don't like DVIs. I think DVIs have limitations. I think they're very powerful. I think they're very important. But what's important to realize is that there's actually 3 different kinds of checklists, right? There's maintenance or courtesy inspection that you do, but there's also checklists that you would perform with the diagnosis as well as quality control. With maintenance courtesy, right, I recommend putting things that are like systems together that you would look at all in one line, as opposed to calling them out individually, which sometimes you see on a lot of DVIs. For example, right, if I'm a technician and I'm doing an engine compartment inspection, I don't necessarily need to have check belts, check hoses, check radiator, check wiring, blah, 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 blah. The reason for this is that that's not how you work on the car, right? You open the hood, you look over the whole engine compartment, and then you can determine that something is the matter or there isn't. And if you determine that something is the matter, then you can check it off accordingly and you can write some notes. And I think, and hopefully this puts things in perspective, I think a lot of people, when you think about checklists in DVIs, it's kind of the cart before the horse, right? You have the technician working for the checklist as opposed to the checklist working for the technician. And I think that's done in part because owners don't trust that technicians are doing the job. And that's problematic, right? You need to remember that you're hiring this person. This person is paid because they know how to fix cars. They don't need to use a checklist to know how to fix cars. So it's important that you're making good use of your technician's time, not just having them do checklists to do checklists. The thing with quality control that I want to call out is that it's often overlooked. And this applies to all cases of services. So you can have checklists for quality control on maintenance, quality control on diagnosis, as well as on repairs. The other thing that's great about this is that when you're including these kinds of checks on the repair order, it's surfacing that attention to detail to the customer and once again adding value, which really is what we're trying to do. All right, so what does that look like? Here's an example of another service that is not an auction. There's a hybrid battery pack, right? I would never put the service as master warning light on or red triangle on, or as we saw in those previous examples, right? Just never, never, never. You want to make sure that the service that is getting performed is very clear. And so, right, in this case, it's to replace the hybrid battery pack. Then you see within this replace battery pack, you've got different labor descriptions that are included, again, with the intention of adding value. We're not just replacing the battery, right? That's it. That could be the only thing you put on there, but that's not demonstrating value, right? You're transferring the control electronics, you're cleaning the battery fan, you're load testing the battery. Again, all of these things are important to showcase. And then we have the part and the 2 inspection lines, right? So, or checklist. So, and that checklist doesn't have to be big, right? You don't have to just have 50 things to make it a checklist. It can be 2. If those are the 2 things that are important to showcase, then that's fine. But it's making sure the technician said, yes, the post-repair load test is correct, and I also cleared the codes, right? And that's showing the value to the customer that these are the things that you're doing. Here's a couple more examples. This one is from Scott Brown from Connie and Dick's in Claremont, California. Scott is probably one of the best diagnostic shops around. They've been very focused on ADAS technology and testing. This is an example of a level 2 electrical performance analysis, right? This is what this repair order that you see, this is what's getting presented to the customer. There's a couple of labor items, and you see that it's $190 and includes some inspections. So these are the things that Scott has determined are important that he wants to service to his customers. And so looking at it, we see recalls, doing a road test, and we see car as a code for the radar sensor, and also TSB that's related to all of that. So all of that stuff is captured on the service and presented as part of what the customer is paying $190 for. This one is an actual calibration service, so a radar calibration. So you're seeing the different kinds of labor operations that are being called out. It's not a laundry list. Like I said, it's not 80 things, it's half a dozen, but all of these things really showcase what does the radar calibration actually include. Like, okay, you calibrated it, great. What are you charging me $340 for, right? Again, think about the previous examples. This doesn't need to be included. These are the types of things that need to be included so the customer isn't asking themselves, what am I being charged $340 for? When they see it like this, okay, now I get it, right? I can see why I'm being charged this kind of money. And right, he also has a checklist, and you can see the checklist is at the bottom. Here's the continuation. But it's adding specifics about what he found as part of the calibration, right? Not just the labor items covering the detail and the value of the service, but also the checklist, right? Which includes, again, conveying the value of the service to the customer. So again, in summary, what we're going to do on the top 2 items, which are related to the repair order, you're going to change the way you're presenting customer states. And you're going to clarify what you're actually doing to the car, right? Which is to say, what are you selling to the customer? And we're going to do this without being overwhelming. If it's pertinent, it's important, and it's something you should include. The next thing you're going to do is emphasize digital content. So obviously, everyone is familiar with taking photos as part of the inspection. But what I want to call out here is that there's a lot of other times that you can be capturing digital content. And the scenarios are when something is broken, when you have test results, when you're performing a fix, when you're doing a teardown, if you have good-bad comparisons, something you found, and then of course, once you completed the fix, right? So tons and tons of opportunity to capture digital content. Like, not just, hey, we noticed you have a trouble code and recommend we replace your hybrid battery. I want to show you the battery is bad, the test that we ran to confirm that. And I'm going to put that all in front of you. I want to take pictures while the car is disassembled. So the customer says, okay, here's where the hybrid battery pack lives. And this is what you removed out of my car. I want to take photos of the new battery and the old battery next to each other. So we present that to the customer. And then at the end, right, you do a final load test that shows the new battery and how it looks good. So the customer can see that these things have changed. And then, of course, right, when that customer pulls out of the shop after having done this, they don't feel like, oh, when I pulled in, my red triangle light thingy was on, and when I pull out, it was off. I hope they replaced my hybrid battery. There's no question, right? They know they paid $3,000 to get their hybrid battery replaced, not just because the light turned off. How do you capture this information? I mean, that's somewhat obvious, right? Tablets are great. You can use your phone to take photos. Phones are great because the technicians have them right in their back pocket. They're super easy to use. They're familiar with how to use them. You can do screenshots. If you don't know how to do a screenshot, you should learn. Screenshots are a great way to capture great information for your customers. You can get screenshots of a parts catalog or a TSV or the scan tool or whatever the case may be. So easy way to capture great content for the customer through screenshots. All right, so let's take a look at some examples, right? Here are some examples of things that are broken. And again, if something's broken, take a photo of it, right? Don't just write it down. If the customer can see that it was broken, then it's not a question of did they actually diagnose it correctly or did it actually need that thing? They can see that it's broken, right? So sometimes videos are better, but generally speaking, if something's broken, you have the opportunity to take a photo of it, right? And then of course you can take a photo of it when it's fixed. You're juxtaposing those next to each other. It's very clear what they had was bad and what they have now that is new. Photos of tests, right? If you're performing tests, take a photo. And what's interesting about this is that, right, you're already doing this. Like you're literally obviously running the test. What takes a lot of extra time is to do the injector flow test, right? To take the picture of it doesn't. You've got to pull out the injectors, you got to hook them all up, blah, blah, blah. Take the time to take a photo. You're doing all of this extra work to run this test. Take a photo of it. Comparison photos, good, bad, right? So here's some really classic examples that you're probably familiar with. And what I want to emphasize here a little extra is even if you're doing maintenance, right? Even if the customer has already agreed that you're going to replace their air filter, right? And you're not even having to sell that work, take a picture of the dirty air filter, take a picture of the clean air filter and put those together. Let's see here. Photos of something getting fixed, right? So here's something getting fixed. And I think this is really important because customers, again, don't have any idea, right? So again, you've sold the work, you've done all the work. This doesn't have to take any extra time. Just take out your phone and grab a couple of pictures, right? So coming back to our example, we've got the hybrid battery replacement. We've got the inside of someone's door. And customers don't see this stuff, right? So when you show it to them, they're like, oh, wow, now I see all the work you had to do to replace that door actuator. That's awesome. I'm glad I paid you an hour and a half to do that. Wiring diagrams, large RNLs, all that stuff is just great high value stuff that you can share. Photos of something getting fixed, right? Here's a before and after of something getting fixed. So it's the fuel pump flow as recorded before it was fixed and after. Very easy. If you're going to run the test, if you're going to fix something, you're already spending the time to do it. Take a photo before, take a photo after. These are the things that might seem simple to you, but they're not simple to the consumer. And this is what needs to be done, which is helping you convey that value that you're trying to show. Here's an example of scan data and screenshots, right? So you can print a PDF or you can take pictures or scan tool, right? If you're using a scan tool, there should be some image or some screenshot or some report that you're taking and putting into the customer. So especially like if you're using a special tool, right? Anytime you employ a special tool to fix something, you should document to the customer. And the customer's thinking, wow, like they had a special tool for this. PSPs, recalls, including all that stuff for customer reference, right? As mentioned, anything, parts diagrams, right? Any of these things that you can find, wiring diagrams, parts, online forums, right? Diag.net, Speed Dial's got some good ones, right? All of this stuff has great content that is easily accessible to you that you can present to the customer. So here's an example, and this comes from Carolyn's shop, hybrid shop in San Francisco, right? This is a recording that's done through TechStream anytime they service the engine cooling system on a second generation Prius, right? So they warm up the engine to operating temperature, which just to bleed it, make sure all the air bubbles are out, then the thermos is bled, right? All that stuff, yada, yada, yada. But when you do that, they hook up the scan tool and record 4 pits: coolant temp, water flow position, what the command position is, and then what the outlet temp is at the little thermos, right, in the bumper. And what's cool about this is that this is just recording while the technicians are cleaning their tools or reviewing their next repair order or whatever the case may be. But what this thing captures is a bunch of really valuable data, right? First of all, it's capturing the three-way valve moving through all the positions, so 2.5, 3.5, and 4.5, which tells me that the valve is moving. You can also see the engine reach operating temperature. So you see the valve is moving, the coolant's reaching the thermos, which is great, and then they achieve parity, so it's completely bled. And then you see the thermos has opened, and then the valve has sufficiently filled the thermos. It's not needing to circulate cool anymore. It moves the valve to a different position, and then we see the engine warm up and the fan cycle. So you get a full view of this car's health, this cooling system health, all in this graph. And they do this on every single car that gets a cooling service. And that's been very helpful, right? Not only in terms of then showing the customer, hey, everything worked, and they might not necessarily, I mean, you're not necessarily going to take them all the way through this, but hey, we just use this graph as part of our routine when we do a cooling service, right? This says that your fans are working and your throughway valve is good and everything's kosher. You don't necessarily have to go into this kind of detail. I wanted to include this detail because I felt like there might be technicians or anyone on this that, you know, kind of wanted to see this kind of stuff and get do a little of a deep dive. But the point is that there's a load of data in here. And secondly, it also helps to cover your butt, right, in case something happens down the road. So here's an example of a failed hybrid battery, right? This is a load test pulling the battery state of charge down, right? And I've moved the cursor out to where the max and the min block lines are at and their largest gap, and that these two values are represented in the screenshot. And you can see the difference between the highest block and the lowest block in the battery is a little less than like 600 millivolts, which of course is unacceptable. And so that's happening. You can also see the delta state of charge for the battery as we start to creep up, right? So classic bad hybrid battery. We would share this with a customer, right? And put it on a share RO and say, hey, look, we load tested your battery. It's bad. You need a new one. Okay, I take your word for it. I guess I see, you know, yada, yada. But this is the information that you can take before, right, to show the customer, obviously, that they need a new battery. But this is the key, and this is what might get overlooked sometimes, is to run the same test again after the repair is over, right? And obviously, you know you don't have to do that, right? It's a brand new battery. It came directly from Toyota. You know it's going to work. But we're going to take the same recording anyway because we want to show to the customer, hey, after you spent all this money, now you can see the results, right? And in this case, the max min between the two is less than 200 millivolts, is a good battery. Customer has the first graph. Now they see the second graph. And this is how we're talking about, right? This is the key to showcasing how you fix the car, right? It's photos of the battery, right? It's the photos of the work that you had to do to get the battery out, to put it back in, the before, the after, the graph, right? All of this is combining together to show what you did on the car. And again, this can be conveyed in a 2-line repair order, like we saw in some examples, or with all of this additional information that we've talked about. So, all right, now we've got this information, right? So now the key is, right, how do we present this information to the customer, right? This is the key. We've done the work. We've done the work. We've captured all the information. How do we now present it in a way that's going to give us the biggest bang for our buck, right? But in terms of how you can put this in front of the customer, you can use a shared RO, right? If you have a shop management system that supports sharing a repair order with the customer via text message or email, you can do that. You could do it with a kiosk, right? And so you have this sort of example here in the video. I'll kind of show how this plays out. great. So, right, if you've got a, one computer monitor, right, you can just sort of monitor that back and forth and kind of show it back and forth as you're sitting there at the desk with them. Obviously, during COVID, this isn't the best way to do it, but pre-COVID or post-COVID, right, this is definitely a way just from a single monitor. But the key, right, is that you're able to sit down with them and go over all of this information, the photos, the scan results, all that stuff that you did. And right, the emphasis here is not just I'm being asked to pay my bill because I'm here and I want to get my car. I'm associating what it is I'm paying for at that same moment with all of this details that you're getting, right? And it's very sophisticated. It reassures the customer that not only did they get what they were paying for, i.e. they can see that it was done, but also that it creates a sense of confidence. Are you guys able to hear me now? I just got a message, no sound. I think we're good. Sound check. Okay, we're good. Sorry about that. What was I? It creates a sense of confidence, right? Confidence in your shop, confidence in your technical ability, right? Because it's inherent in what you're communicating and how you're communicating with them, right? So the idea is to give them that warm, fuzzy feeling, right? That these guys did a good job, not just because of what you did, but how you're showing it to me. Another option is to go with like a really big screen. We'll go back to that. Another is to do it with like a really big screen. I'll show you that example. But the other way you can do it, right, is if you don't have all this hardware set up in your shop already, you can do it like with an all-in-one computer, right? So they're cheap now. They've got touch screens. You can use a mini PC with like a touchscreen monitor, like a Google Chromebox. So for like $500, you can make a sophisticated impact on your customer. The other option, right, is just to have another monitor on the other side where the customer is sitting or by the door or wherever they're picking up, where you guys are sort of communicating, right? Again, COVID makes it harder, but you can have another monitor that the customer can sit. Or in this case, just have a really big monitor. And in this case, this one was set up, to deal with social distancing, but you could have a service advisor with, the personal protection stuff, a big monitor they're able to view from the side. The service advisor is still able to show the information to the consumer with a tablet or this giant screen. And that, that's just another way to do it. So you don't have to have a management system that does this, right? You could just use at its simplest to capture, you could just use a Google Drive, a point and shoot camera with a Wi-Fi SD card. Just make sure whatever the technician is capturing is getting sent to that storage device. And then you can just pull up all that data that you had, all those photos that you collected, and show that to the customer when they come to pick up their car with a great big screen like you have here. But just being able to put this stuff in front of your customer is going to make you look, well, it's going to make you look fantastic, right? Again, you've captured all this information, you've done all the work. Now you're going to present it to the customer in a clear and succinct way, and it's going to make a difference. Right? It's going to be impactful for your technicians. It's going to be impactful for your business. It's going to be impactful for your shop. And which essentially you're doing is you're increasing their willingness to give you money and understand why they're giving you money, right? Because the last thing you want is them leaving your shop, not knowing why they gave you money and feeling bad about it. So in conclusion, right, showcasing your technical expertise is showcasing your value. And this is what I said at the very beginning. It is what you do. It is what you're best at. It is what you're selling. It's the primary component. The primary component of your value is your technical expertise, right? You need to be sensitive, of course, about overwhelming them or browbeating them or intimidating them, but you need to get this across. You need to be thoughtful about making sure that the information you're providing is pertinent, right? It's not a perfect science. Some people want more, some people want less. That's up to your service advisor to gauge. I just sort of follow the general rule of, is it relevant to what you did? If it is, great, then you decide how much you want to go into detail when the customer picks up their car. And most importantly, you want to show them how you fix the car, the fix, the thing that they're paying for, right? Again, seems obvious. The main demonstration, the thing you need to do, the thing you need to showcase is how you're fixing the car. And this will make you look more sophisticated, knowledgeable, and organized. And again, I mentioned this before, The main thing that this will do, or one of the benefits of this, is it takes the emphasis off of the shop and it puts it on the car, right? Because it's not the shop's fault, it's the car's fault. And that's what we want to do, is remove the emphasis from you and put it on the car. Because you guys often, right, you get killed as the messenger, right? Like, it's your fault that things are happening this way. It's your fault they're having to pay $850, right? But you're not the bad guys. You're the good guys. You're here to help them, right? God knows if you wanted to make money, you could go do something else besides dealing with all of this. But obviously, that's not the fact. So, right, the fact is that you do this because you care about people, because you care about cars, and being able to help the customer really appreciate that is important, right? And it's also really important for your stress level, right? Having this constant battle between you and the customer, right? This constant animosity of it's your fault, and this, antagonistic relationship is draining, right? It's not what you want to be spending your time doing. And it's not fun for you. It's not fun for the customer. You want to avoid it. And that's really where taking all of this data and showcasing it to the customer helps alleviate that sort of conflict between you two. Because your advisor shouldn't have to do that, right? Like, I mean, they need to be personable, but you should be able to just present the details of the car, right? It's not your problem, it's the customer's problem. They bought the car, right? So show them the information of what's going on, show them you're trying to help them, show them you're trying to help them make the right decision. And the reality is the result will be higher tickets, but even more importantly, you'll create raving fans and raving customers and amazing 5-star reviews on your business. So that's the meat and potatoes of today. I hope that you enjoyed it. We are coming up on the hour, so we didn't leave a ton of room for Q&A, but I will check my Q&A and see if I do have some questions, and we can go from there. All right. Well, I guess I just included all the information. Yes, this has been recorded, and we will let you know if there's a way to how you can get a copy of the recording. Thanks for your question, Jim. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I guess that concludes our presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. My information will be in the follow-up email that we send out. We've got some great webinars lined up for the rest of this month. Hopefully you will want to attend some more. I really thank you for your time, and that concludes our broadcast.